Welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'd like to welcome Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's your neck today?
Still giving me pain, but it's all right.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. So one of the tools that's in our photographer's arsenal is the use of off-camera strobes. And it's an important tool and one that's been used quite a lot. So obviously this involves a certain amount of tech to get your strobes to fire remotely. So I thought
we do like that.
We like a bit of tech, yeah. so I thought I'd pass that straight on to Alex like a hot potato and say, Alex, how do you get your strobes to fire when they're not wired to your cameras?
Yeah, well, yeah, like you say, I think off-camera strobes are attractive to underwater photographers for two reasons. The first is it increases our toy count, and there's not an underwater photographer out there who doesn't like that side of underwater photography.
Yep.
But perhaps more photographically interesting is the fact that with off-camera strobes, we can create really different types of underwater pictures and push boundaries back.
Yep.
And although the technique has been around in underwater photography for a long time, it was, first really used widely in cave diving, but maybe not especially creatively, just really as a necessity.
Yeah.
And then more recently, over the last sort of 15 years or so, has sort of proliferated more into more mainstream underwater photography, and is now widely used both in wide-angle photography for backlighting, for lighting up backgrounds, for creating depth in images, and in macro photography, again, for backlighting or for off-camera snooting, that sort of thing. Sure. So there's a lot of use for off-camera strobes. So it's a very valuable technique. But in terms of the equipment, to answer your question, which I never do, this is kind of, I would say, is kind of a standard setup for me. I don't always use this big old flash gun, but actually I put it on because I wanted to make the point. Let me hold it in frame.
There we go. Yeah,
I wanted to make the point is that actually, I think a lot of photographers, they just put their kind of spare flash gun as their off-camera strobe.
Yeah.
And actually, particularly for wide angle, when doing wide angle off-camera strobe shooting, you actually want to have your biggest, most powerful gun as your off-camera strobe.
Yeah.
Because typically that strobe is going to be away from the camera, somewhere within the picture, and you need to have a lot of power for it, but you also want that strobe to have a wide beam.
Yeah.
Because it's often much closer to part of the scene than your strobes, which are behind the camera, are. So in order for it to light up a reasonably large area, the wider the beam, the better.
Yeah.
So if you are planning to do off-camera strobes, put your best strobe as your off-camera strobe rather than not so.
Yeah.
The other reason for having a powerful strobe is one of the classic techniques of off-camera strobe shooting is to have your on-camera strobes basically invisible in the picture and all the light coming from this big boy lighting up the scene. So if this is nice and powerful on high power, then it can light up the scene, and you can run your main strobes on low power and they don't light anything up.
Yeah.
Also, you can make use of good, big, powerful old second-hand strobes like this for this use, because typically with off-camera strobe, you don't need loads of power adjustability. A lot of old strobes kind of had full power, half power, quarter power, and that was it.
Yeah.
But actually, that's quite useful for off-camera strobes because you take nearly all the pictures with them on full power, maybe on half power. So you don't need that adjustability. So it's quite a good use for picking up a cheap but powerful old off-camera strobe and using that. You then need, the other reason I like using this strobe actually is that although it's a big old lug on land, because of its size, it's neutrally buoyant in the water. And actually, that's really helpful. If you have a heavy strobe, it will sometimes tilt the tripod over and make it topple. If you have a buoyant strobe, obviously then it starts floating away.
Yeah.
So a nice neutrally buoyant strobe actually works well on a tripod, and then you've just got the weight of the tripod itself to keep it down on the seabed. Yeah. There's enough weight in the clamps and things just to weight it down, and it becomes a much more manageable thing. So that is actually quite a valuable thing to have that all set up. Then I've always used Gorilla pods for this. They're cheap, waterproof, and you can relatively easily attach a strobe mounted ball onto the top of them as a standard thread on a Gorilla pod. And then I just use a bit of cable tie and I just put a clip on it, and that way I can clip that to my BCD when I'm diving, and it stays nicely. I fold it up so it's sort of folded away like this, and I'll clip it down here while I'm descending down to the dive site, and then get it out. The other thing I'll often do if I'm on a trip is I'll make sure that I've got my name on it, And particularly if it's on like a busy rec site or something, I will put a piece of tape on it, of duct tape on it, and then right on the top, off camera strobe, please leave. This is not lost, because sometimes you can set them off, and some well-meaning person, or maybe not so well-meaning person, comes along and picks it up. If you do see someone reaching for your off-camera strobe, the best solution is just to take a picture, and then this thing goes off, hang in their face, and they stop messing around with the stuff. So, Ben, actually, what makes this work really well is this side of it, which is, and this is the sort of the key piece of tech, and that's a flash trigger. So this is a sensor that sees the light from my on-camera strobes, receives that light, and then uses that light to trigger the main strobe. I use electronic ones for these. I mean, there are fiber optic versions now, but I like electronic ones. The weight of the cable actually is quite handy for keeping it all down and out of sight in the picture, although it is a little bit bigger. But it's also, for me, important. This is the one, this particular one is the one I always use. This was made by Pete Liddell, who's a British underwater photographer, who's a very good engineer and makes things. And actually, this is built around a sensor that Adam found for me when I was first getting into this. And the sensors that were available were all basically rubbish. They work well in black caves, but they didn't work in daylight. And Adam found this sensor that had the right specifications. I took it to Pete Liddell, told him I wanted this to be negative. I wanted a straight cable, about 0.5 meter, coming off the back of it. You don't need mountains of cable. Too much cable, it gets tangled up all the time.
It's a pain,
And you don't want it coiled like a normal strobe cable, because a coiled cable, when you haven't got connectors at both ends, basically pulls itself short again. So a straight cable is actually more valuable. But you don't need really long cable. So 0.5 meter of this cable, and then the standard strobe cable is more than enough cable for anything you ever need. You never really need to hide them. The cable is just enough so that the sensor can be visible to the camera, but the strobe can be hidden from the camera.
That's the key aspect, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think the pictures are generally most exciting when the light just magically appears in the picture and you don't see the light source. So the ability to hide the strobe away from the camera behind a rock or whatever it is, and have the light magically appearing is the main thing. And so and very rarely is the strobe going to be hidden by anything more than about 0.5 meter, a couple of feet, really. So if you've got at least 1 meter of cable, that's more than enough to get the two apart.
I think it's worth mentioning is because many modern strobes actually have built-in optical sensors, but the problem with that is in the vast majority of cases, for them to work, the strobe has to be visible to your triggering strobe, and this is what the advantage of having a cabled connection is of some description. Is it allows you to hide the strobe away and just have the sensor effectively in shot, which is a 2-minute job with a clone brush, compared to having to have the whole strobe in shot, which tends to look messy. You get hot spots and everything else. So
no, that's absolutely really important point you made there, Adam. I probably should have started with that, really, in that we use these sensors for that ability to hide the flash. I generally don't bother cloning these out of the pictures because actually they're not normally lit up. It's black. Obviously we designed it to be black, and it kind of pretty much disappears, although it looks quite big, me holding it in front of the camera. Once it's in the background of a wide angle picture, you just notice it. But if you want to clone it out, you could do. I'm too lazy for that sort of thing. So that's kind of the main setup. I don't always use such a big strobe, but I'll always put a powerful strobe on. Certainly for wide angle shooting. The other thing I do as well sometimes is I will sometimes take down a spare, just the smallest weight they've got on the boat, and I'll put a cable tie around that, and I'll use this same clip that I use for clipping it to my BCD to just leave a cable, a weight on it, just to make it a little bit more stable on the seabed sometimes. I don't do that if I'm in a cave or in a wreck where there's not any water movement. But if there's a site with a lot of surge or a site with a lot of current, then it's useful to have that. So that's kind of my main setup. I've shown you mine, Adam. You know what you have to do now. What have you got there to show me?
I've got a pile of stuff typically. So let's start with wired connections.
Know this, Adam.
Let's start with wired connections. So when we first started out, kind of on this off-camera journey, if that's the correct, a Wetpixel member called Hedwig Dioret started producing an off-camera optical trigger. This is it. It's called the Triggerfish. And
it was during the time of Harry Potter as well. So
it was.
Forgot his name. Yeah.
And it connects with a Iconus 5-pin connector. It powers from the Iconus anyway. It doesn't need external power. They're really nice and simple, and they're pretty sensitive, so no problem with that at all. I did quite a lot of testing with them at the time and the results are actually on Wetpixel. But so they connect with a 5-pin Iconus connection. I
think that you actually made a really good point there, which I didn't really get into with mine, is the fact that some of them can be powered from the strobe itself, and some of them need a battery in them. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. Having to power from the strobe can reduce the compatibility of some of them with some of the strobe models. And obviously, if they're going to be just fiber by fiber, then they're not. If they have a battery in, you either need to replace that battery from time to time or charge that battery. So that's kind of what's that one?
So this is the CCAM optical trigger.
I've not tried that one.
It has a sensor in here, and then what it has as well is it has a little snooty kind of cover which allows you to direct or to allow it to be more accurate in the direction that it senses from. So it's very nice and light and compact, like Headwinds as well. And this one works with a CCAM S6, or it doesn't have CCAM, but an S6 cable. And I've got one that CCAM kindly made for me, which is actually, again, like a nice little section of short straight cable.
That's very nice.
Which actually works really, really well with, obviously, specifically, well, it can be any S6 strobe, but I use it with my CCAM strobes, and it's really nice. I have used it with the one underwater 160s as well, and it works fine with that. They were S6 connections, so and I did actually do some testing with it, and they worked fine. So yeah, it's a nice little setup. Again, powered from the strobe, so no external batteries, running like no batteries in the actual sensor itself. Nice and neat and compact. So yeah, it's a really nice option. And going back to what you said about the power of the strobes, that allows you to use the big CCAM 150, 160 strobes with a snoot or whatever, and it's a nice combination. So that because they have all that power.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I would say is that actually, although the CCAM one has got that kind of snooty cover to stop false triggering, typically the problem with safe sensors is the other one of actually getting the bloody things to fire.
It is.
So I always say to anyone trying them for the first time, make sure that you test them multiple times on the boat and really be sure it's firing. One of the big problems can be is the issue with pre-flashes. And most of them are designed for manual shooting. Some of them do have modes that can deal with pre-flash. But generally, you want to turn all pre-flashes off. Have everything on single flash. So everything knows what it's doing. And as you say, you want to test them on the boat, not just so they're flashing, but make sure that you're getting a picture in your camera of them flashing, because there is issues of sync, as you mentioned. It's a good because they'll flash even if they're not syncing.
So
and then
my third option.
I know you've got this one because I've seen the bruises on your. I mean, I
this is the anglerfish, and this uniquely from the ones that I've shown you has its own power source. This particular one has a battery in it. A little lithium battery. Some of the others are rechargeable. Same brand. I think it's version 1 is rechargeable, and version 2 and 3 are battery powered. I forget. I may have the numbers wrong, but and uniquely possibly, and part of the reason it needs a battery is this one triggers using fiber optic. So you can use a fiber optic cable into this, which allows you to trigger obviously strobes that don't have an electrical connection, or sometimes it's just more convenient to use fiber optic than an electric sync cable.
I think one of the big things that's good about fiber optic is that in the middle of a dive, you could carry that in your pocket and just completely disconnect one of your strobes off your housing and suddenly start doing some off-camera strobe pictures without the need of plugging stuff in.
It does. I should point out, it will trigger electrically as well. It has an electrical port in the bottom as well. So it does do both. But I think probably its unique part is the fact that it triggers fiber optically. Now, as Alex has alluded to, they are somewhat complicated to make them work. I was tempted.
You don't find them complicated.
I find with them. I get them to work fine, but the rest of the world finds them difficult, which probably means that there's. But suffice to say, there's a series of taps that you need to do. I won't go into it on here, but if anyone is interested, I might record a video of me doing the correct sequence of taps to get it to work at some point.
We just all need the tune in our head. I think the issue is is that none of us have bothered to read the instruction manual apart from you.
Yeah.
Everyone else is like, I plugged it in, it should work.
So
you have to read the instruction manual.
So maybe
you need to make a video with the tapping sequence. We'll all remember the song, and then we'll all be fine.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So good. So those are all my triggers. So 3 different triggers, but then mounting options. And the first one is something I did talk about in my gear episode. And again, this is made by Hedwig. This is fairly specific for cave divers. And what it is it's a mounting plate with a ball, 1-inch ball, which obviously attaches to your strobe. And then this part of the mounting plate, these are very strong magnets. So these can then be placed on a tank, for example, anything else is magnetic, and then you can mount the strobe around. It does have cam strap holes in the ends of it, so you can actually fit a cam strap if you've got an aluminium cylinder, for example. But it's a really nice way of mounting a strobe onto a diver. I mean, that's what it does, really.
I'm just going to show you my version of that, actually. So keep chatting. I'm just going to find it.
And then, the other option that I have that I must confess that is probably my preferred options. I've got this wonderful tripod here. It's an underwater tripod. It's made by Inon, if you're in America. It's very modular. You can use all sorts of different lengths. These are actually carbon fiber arms that Inon make, and so you can use different length arms. It's a fully fledged underwater tripod, really nice and stable. It has various different head options. I've actually modified. This is a little sort of simple ball head. You can get a fully fledged ball head for it, but it's a simple little ball head, and I've just mounted a 1-inch ball on it. But these will also mount directly into Inon's strobes as well, so you can screw the strobe straight onto it, and then adjust the angle of it using the head.
That is nice.
It has a center post. I mean, it's a fully fledged underwater mini tripod. It's a really nice piece of gear. So
it's good if you bought it for, to use as a photographic tripod. It actually gives you a second use for
absolutely.
It.
And you can. I mean, this has been in seawater. It's been underwater. It's completely impervious to. In the past, when I was doing some strobe testing, I took a quite expensive Gitso stainless steel tripod underwater, and it's never been quite the same since, which was a bit of a big mistake, really. So this covers that. It has an attachment point, and like Alex, what I do basically is I use a few of these clips. I use the double-ended clips like this, and I use one to attach to that, one to attach to me, and it sits down here on a D-ring, stays out the way, and it's relatively compact. So it's a really nice option. Really, really nice for using with a snoot for off-camera snooting, which is my preferred way of snooting. So which I'm sure will be the subject of a future episode. But yeah, so really nice attachment point. Yeah, so that's about it. The only other thing to mention, something that's relatively new to me, in fact I've only used it recently, is I managed to get hold of some fibre optic cables that were a bit longer than the standard ones. So I found that the standard ones, when I was mounting on a diver with the magnetic bracket, are not quite long enough to get the sensor around to the front of the diver, and it was pulling it. And what was happening is that the cables were coming undone with the fibers. So this is just a little bit longer. This is made by Howshot. And they're available. You can buy them, but again, I think quite a useful tool if you're just finding that the length of the standard length fibre is not quite long enough. But otherwise, I mean, it's a standard L type fibre optic cable. So yeah, just a little bit longer.
And this is the thing I went off to go and grab. This is actually the prototype one, the finished one. I did get out, but I've now managed to lose. And this is my way of mounting strobes onto the diver, which works really well kind of in a more non-technical situation. And this is basically just a flat aluminium plate with a ball mount collar on it. Yep. And you can just slide on and off one of those screw-on strobe balls onto it. Yep. And what you do with this is you just put it on the back of the cylinder, put the cam band of the BCD around it, and it just clamps into place. Yep. And I've used this quite a bit, and it's quite a useful thing. And it's very light and easy just to throw in a suitcase. Yep. And I don't take an extra one of these. I just use a spare one that's around on the trip. Yep. And it's nice and easy, and you can take the strobe on and off it, so you can get the divers to jump in the water with this already in place, but without the strobe on, and then you fit the strobe onto them once they're safely in the water. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's certainly. I think one of the advantages, possibly, of fibre, which I think you've alluded to, Alex, is obviously it's pluggable and unpluggable underwater, which is pretty good. It means you can go underwater with strobes in one position, decide that you want to change it, you want to take a strobe off your camera housing and put it onto a dive, onto a remote, whatever, and you can do that relatively easily with fiber. So one of the advantages of fiber is it does give you more options underwater. Having said that, most of the time, if I'm planning to use off-camera strobe, I go with the strobe dedicated to do that. And to be fair, I'll quite often carry it and not use it. So if I'm looking for an opportunity to use it, I'll swim around with it attached to me, and I may not find the opportunity, and hence I may not use it. So I will carry one quite often, even in situations where I don't actually use it, and that's particularly true with my macro snoot with its off-camera setup. You don't always find subjects that are suitable for it. So yeah.
I think the only thing I want to add now, the sort of final thing I want to say is whether to use more than one.
Yeah.
And occasionally there are shots where you can make interesting pictures by using two strobes, which is about, for me, the most of remote strobes I want to carry on a dive.
Yeah.
You can do setups, and on my workshops in the Red Sea, we very often do shots in the Thistlegorm where you get 3 or 4 divers work together. They all take one strobe down, set them all up in different places, and then take pictures together.
Yeah.
And that can create some really, really nice shots.
Yeah.
But I think trying to do that amount of work yourself, unless you're very shallow or you've got huge amounts of time to kill, I don't think is a particularly productive way of working. Although your toy count goes up, your workload goes up a lot too.
It's a slightly humorous story in that I put 4 strobes into the airplane at Cape Town at my local dive site when I was diving with the hardest working man in underwater imaging, Takuya Torre-san from Inon, and it was in January, and the water temperature was about 5 degrees, something like that, and I was down there arranging strobes inside this airplane for hours. poor Torre-san, who is not really a cold water diver. By the time I got him out, I think he's still traumatized actually. So daisy chaining a bunch of strobes together, it becomes, you can get really, really complicated, and the trick is to have a bunch of people to help you out. It's really hard work otherwise, because inevitably one strobe doesn't fire, and that breaks the chain, and then you have to go and figure out why that one's not firing. Yeah, it's quite hard work.
And most, I would say 90% of the strongest images can be made with just one remote strobe.
Yeah, you can get overly complicated with it. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Alex has lots of wonderful off-camera strobe images. Can you search for them on your website, Alex?
Maybe, but typically I tend to write about what the picture's about, not how I've taken it in the captions.
Yeah.
But sometimes you might get somewhere with off camera, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, have a look around. There's lots of wonderful imagery about the place for off-camera strobes. Very useful tool. So thank you, Alex, and thank you all for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please like it. If you'd like us to cover topics in future, please feel free to leave suggestions in the comment section below this. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, which is Icolite Underwater, I hope that you'll come and join us on our next episode, which will be releasing soon. Thank you very much, and all the best.